Let's talk to Andrew Lowney, the author of the brilliant book entitled That Began the First.
To the changes within his family. After his uncle Prince Andrew was stripped of his royal titles
naming then Prince Charles as being responsible for his brother Andrew losing his job.
Okay, this is big news.
As we just got these images in, this is there as authorities have now released former Prince Andrew from...
The late Virginia Giuffre has welcomed news about the widening of the investigation into Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
So every day there's another damaging story about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, of course the disgraced former Prince Andrew.
For you this morning, British police have arrested Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew. And now to our other top story. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is back at the royal residence on Sandringham Estate this morning.
But the story here is the King stepped out in Essex today and was heckled by the crowd.
Amanpour to address the recent shifts in the royal family during the Earthshot Prize Awards in Brazil.
This is the first time we've seen Charles's name appear, and it is considered a really significant development.
We're seeing as the gates are now opening and the former Prince Andrew will be exiting. And so we were able to speak with several of...
Now, while police have not made any link between the former claims of the late Virginia Giuffre dating back 15 years ago and
Andrew for misconduct in public office, police are also assessing reports that a woman was taken to Windsor.
Prince, for survivors everywhere, Virginia did this for you. Andrew has denied her allegations. CBS morning to you. The former prince is now effectively living in exile there, very isolated after yesterday.
For decades, Prince Andrew's military titles and royal patronages were part of his public identity. Vice Admiral, Colonel-in-Chief, a son of the Queen standing in uniform at Remembrance Sunday, year after year. Then, in January 2022, one day after a New York judge refused to dismiss a civil lawsuit against him, Buckingham Palace issued a statement that reduced all of it to 2 words: private citizen. The statement was 6 sentences long. It said his military affiliations and royal patronages had been returned to the Queen, with her approval and agreement. It said he would continue not to undertake public duties. And it said he was defending the case as a private citizen. No royal had lost this much, this fast, in the modern history of the monarchy. And the decision didn't come from lawyers. It came from his mother. The lawsuit itself was brought by Virginia Giuffre, who accused Andrew of sexual abuse connected to his association with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew denied the allegations then, and he denied them afterward. That civil case is not this story. This story is about what his mother did once it became clear the case was going to trial, and why she moved when she did, not sooner, not later. By January 2022, the Queen was 95. She had buried her husband of 73 years the previous April, in a funeral scaled down by pandemic rules to 30 guests, her alone in a pew built for 2. She had spent months largely out of public view, using a walking stick, canceling appearances her doctors called unnecessary. And ahead of her sat the Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne, a milestone no other British monarch had reached. Andrew's case had been dragging since August 2021. His lawyers tried to have it dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. That failed. They argued a 2009 settlement Giuffre reached with Epstein should shield Andrew too. The judge disagreed. On January 12th, he ruled the case would proceed to trial, and Andrew would have to answer questions under oath. Within 24 hours, the palace acted, not with a legal filing, but with a single-page statement that stripped him of everything that made him, publicly, a working royal. That speed is the part worth sitting with. Buckingham Palace does not usually move overnight. Statements about royal roles usually pass through weeks of drafting, legal review, consultation with the Cabinet Office. This one appeared within a day of the ruling. Royal correspondents covering the story at the time noted that the decision had, in one commentator's words, been widely discussed inside the family well before the judge's ruling forced the timeline. The Queen wasn't reacting blind. She had been watching the case build for months, and she had a plan ready the moment the legal outcome made it unavoidable. What made this different from every previous royal demotion was the source of the pressure. It didn't come from Downing Street. It came from the armed forces themselves. more than 150 Royal Navy and Army veterans signed an open letter addressed directly to the Queen, asking her to strip Andrew of the honorary ranks he held: Vice Admiral, Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, Colonel-in-Chief of several regiments, titles that exist because the sovereign is the head of the armed forces and the sovereign grants them. The veterans wrote that Andrew had brought the regiments he was associated with into disrepute. For the Queen, that letter mattered more than any newspaper column. She had spent 70 years building her authority on one specific relationship, her bond with the military. Losing that trust, even by association, was a risk to the institution itself, not just to her son. So when she acted, she didn't act like a mother protecting a child. She acted like the head of an institution protecting it from a threat inside her own family. The titles she stripped weren't ceremonial trinkets to her. Vice Admiral of the Royal Navy is a role the sovereign personally confers. Every one of Andrew's military affiliations existed because she, specifically, had given them. Taking them back was not a palace committee decision. It was the Queen, using authority that belonged to her alone, undoing what she alone had granted. This wasn't the first time a British monarch had chosen the institution over a family member facing public disgrace. In 1936, Edward VIII gave up the throne itself rather than give up the woman he wanted to marry. And the family that came after him spent decades treating that abdication as a warning, not a romance. The Queen grew up inside that lesson. Her own father took the throne because his brother chose personal desire over institutional duty, and it shaped how she governed her family for the rest of her life. Every time a royal's private conduct threatened to become a public liability, she measured the decision against that memory. Andrew's case, on paper, had nothing to do with abdication, but the underlying calculation was the same one her father had lived through: protect the crown first and let personal cost follow. Those close to the palace at the time described the mood inside as unusually tense, even by the standards of a family used to crisis. According to people present that week, aides had prepared more than one version of a statement, waiting to see which way the judge would rule before finalizing language. Staff who worked through the period later said the final wording went through several rounds of revision in a matter of hours, not because anyone disagreed with the substance, but because every word carried legal and diplomatic weight. A phrase as small as "returned to the Queen" had to survive scrutiny from the palace's lawyers, its press office, and the cabinet office simultaneously, all before breakfast the next morning. There's a detail people miss about the mechanics of what happened. The statement said, patronages were returned to the Queen, not transferred to another family member, not suspended pending the case's outcome. Returned. That word choice was deliberate. It meant the roles reverted to her personally, as the ultimate source of every royal patronage and honorary command in the country. She wasn't punishing Andrew by handing his job to someone else. She was pulling the roles back to herself, the way a landlord reclaims a property, rather than simply changing the tenant. It signaled that this wasn't a reshuffle, it was a removal, full stop, with no path back built into the language. Royal correspondents who cover the family closely have said the Queen met with Andrew in person before the statement went out, informing him of her decision face-to-face rather than through aides. If accurate, that detail matters. This wasn't a memo. It was a mother telling her son, directly, that the answer was no, and then letting the palace's press office turn that private conversation into 6 clipped sentences for the world to read. Whatever was said in that room stayed in that room. What reached the public was the driest possible version of a decision that could not have been anything but painful to deliver. The phrase "private citizen" did more work than its 2 words suggest. Every previous crisis in Andrew's public life, the 2019 BBC interview about his friendship with Epstein, his earlier stepping back from public duties, had left him diminished but still, formally, a working member of an institution with royal protections around him. This was different. Private citizen meant no round-the-clock royal security funded by the taxpayer in the way senior royals receive it. It meant no high RH style used in any official capacity, a change one royal source confirmed to the BBC the same day. It meant facing a jury if the case reached one, exactly as any other defendant would. Alone, under his own name, with none of the institutional distance the family had maintained around him for 60 years. Biographers who tracked the Queen's public appearances that winter noted a woman who gave almost nothing away. She kept her scheduled engagements where her health allowed, attended a small reception for the Sandringham estate the same week, and made no reference to Andrew in any public remark before or after the statement. That silence was itself characteristic. Across 7 decades on the throne, she had rarely explained her private reasoning for anything, treating explanation as a concession she wasn't willing to make. Courtiers who had worked with her for years said the closest she came to acknowledging the weight of the decision was in how deliberately she avoided discussing it at all, a discipline some described as the clearest sign of how much it had cost her. For the monarchy, the timing mattered as much as the substance. The Jubilee was 5 months away. Every appearance the Queen made in 2022 was going to be measured against 70 years of service, watched by a global audience already primed to ask what the institution looked like without her. Andrew, in uniform, on a balcony or at a service of Thanksgiving, would have turned a celebration of continuity into a referendum on the family's judgment. Removing him from public duties wasn't only about the court case, it was about protecting the one event the Queen had spent her final working years building toward. The consequences rippled beyond Andrew immediately. His military affiliations, regiments, ships companies, veterans associations that had treated his patronage as a point of pride, needed new figureheads, and within weeks, several of those roles were quietly redistributed among working royals, chiefly Princess Anne and the then Prince of Wales. Charities that had listed Andrew as patron faced their own decision: distance themselves publicly or wait and see. Several moved fast. The Royal National Institute for Deaf People and other organizations he'd supported for years ended the association within the same month, a wave of separation that made clear the institutions themselves feared the reputational cost of standing still. Each organization handled the break differently, and those differences say something about how far the damage had spread. Some issued brief, careful statements thanking Andrew for years of service while noting the patronage had formally ended. Others simply removed his name from their websites without comment, unwilling to draw further attention by explaining themselves at all. A handful waited months, hoping the story would fade before they had to decide, and found instead that every fresh headline about the case reopened the question of whether they still wanted his name attached to their work. For an institution built on decades of quiet, careful branding, watching that unravel in a matter of weeks was its own kind of loss, separate from anything the palace statement had directly caused. For Andrew personally, the practical changes went beyond the ceremonial. Losing HRH usage in official settings meant losing the shorthand that had opened doors his entire life: introductions, seating arrangements, deference from people who had never questioned his standing before. People who worked alongside him in those months described a man still processing the scale of what had happened, uncertain which invitations still applied to him and which no longer did. The uniforms stayed in his wardrobe. He simply had no occasions left to wear them. For the family, the deeper cost was harder to measure. Andrew was not banished from Windsor or Sandringham privately. He continued to appear at family gatherings, walking beside his mother at Philip's memorial service that March, an image that drew its own criticism from commentators who felt the public exile and the private welcome sat uneasily together. That contrast, publicly stripped, privately present, became its own story, one that suggested the Queen had drawn a line between institutional consequence and maternal relationship, and was determined to keep the two separate even when the public wanted them merged into one. By the time the Jubilee arrived in June, Andrew's absence from the Trooping the Colour balcony was itself confirmation of how total the January decision had been. He tested positive for COVID days before the main celebrations and missed the Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's entirely. But even before that, palace planning had already excluded him from the working royal balcony appearance, the year's most photographed moment. What began as a legal necessity in January had, by June, become a fixed and permanent arrangement with no indication from the palace that any of it was temporary. The case itself was settled out of court that February, with no admission of liability and an undisclosed sum reportedly donated to a charity supporting victims of trafficking. Andrew's team framed the settlement as a private resolution, closed and finished. But the settlement changed nothing about what the Queen had already decided months before it was reached. She never reversed the January statement. Andrew's titles were not restored when the lawsuit ended, and no palace source ever suggested they would be. That silence spoke as clearly as the original statement had. It would have been easy in the weeks after the settlement to treat the case's resolution as a natural moment to quietly walk the January decision back, a face-saving return to some reduced version of his old role, timed to attract minimal attention. The Queen did not take that opening. Whatever calculation had led her to act in January was not tied to the outcome of the lawsuit itself. It was tied to what the accusation and the trial it would have produced meant for the institution, regardless of how the case ended. Settling the case removed the immediate legal threat. It did nothing to restore the trust that had already been spent. For a woman who rarely explained her decisions and almost never reversed them, the absence of any walkback was itself the final word. What the January 2022 statement revealed, more than anything else, was where the Queen's loyalty ultimately sat when the two demands of her life collided. She was a mother for 95 years and a monarch for 70. When those roles pulled in opposite directions, she chose the crown. Quickly, without visible hesitation, and without waiting for the courts to force her hand any further than they already had. It's a decision that still shapes how the institution is run today, in how quickly working royals now distance themselves from controversy, and in how carefully the family manages who stands on that balcony each June. If you want more deep dives like this into the private decisions behind royal history, subscribe to Royal Archives, because the story didn't end with that one statement. Andrew's position within the family kept evolving in the years after. His residence, his finances, his role at royal funerals and coronations all became fresh points of tension long after the cameras had moved elsewhere. Each new dispute got measured against the same baseline the Queen had set that January morning, whether anyone said so out loud or not. What she started with 6 sentences in January 2022, her family would keep negotiating for years to come, using the line she drew as the starting point every single time.